Now let's look at some theories of socialization, or theories in how we form the self. First, we're going to look at Freud's unconscious self. Freud says that we have a life instinct, which is our basic need for bonding. He says that there is an opposing need to this, or an aggressive drive, which he refers to as the death instinct. The interplay between these two forces, much of which is done unconsciously, is what forms the foundation of human drama. The id is a biological drive that tends to dominate behavior. It focuses on gratifying needs, and it tends to be antisocial. It's done unconsciously. For example, kids want something to eat. They cry. Eventually, children are rewarded or punished based on their parents' behavior, and they learn to conform to social norms, that there's a certain time to eat, that once you get older you can't start crying because you didn't get the cupcake you wanted. So they're starting to internalize those values and norms. So I oftentimes refer to the id as the yes. No matter what, yes, satisfy my needs. The superego is your conscience. It's the one that I refer to as saying, no, no. You have to do this based on this. No, no. And then your ego steps in as the mediator. It's your rational conscience that seeks to resolve the conflict between the id and the superego, so that there's ways to satisfy both. Freud's theory is important, especially sociologically, because it tells how people internalize norms, how childhood experiences can have lasting impacts on socialization. Now let's look at Piaget's cognitive development. Piaget says that each stage is a product of biological maturation and increasing social experience. So as we mature biologically and the more experiences we have, we develop the different types of intelligences. First is sensory motor intelligence, which oftentimes we would affiliate with young children. They're gaining skills in acting out actions and sounds. They're starting to comprehend symbols, but most of their intelligence is limited to their direct physical experience. In the pre-operational stage, they start using words and symbols. They're developing a memory, but they still perceive the world from their vantage point, me. In the concrete operational stage, they start to perceive causal connections in their surroundings, and they're beginning to use some logic in coordinating their behavior. But for this part, I always focus on the concrete. It still has to be concrete, or in other words, written in stone, very focused for them to understand it. With formal operational, they're beginning to use some abstract thought, and they can imagine alternatives to reality. Next, let's look at Kohlberg's moral development. Kohlberg says there's 3 levels of moral development, each one more complex in resolving moral dilemmas. We pass through the levels as we mature, but development could stop at any of the levels. In the pre-conventional level, right and wrong is defined as obedience or disobedience. Basically, rightness would amount to how much it serves my needs or what makes me feel good. So I may take that cookie even though I'm told not to because it makes me feel good, and the consequences aren't going to really be that bad. So they're more concerned in focusing on the consequences rather than the intentions behind the act. So if they take the cookie and they're not going to get that much trouble, they've satisfied their need and their want, but they may have just gotten scolded and they're okay with that. In a conventional stage, this is based more on socially approved values. We trust some authority to define right and wrong for them. They're less self-centered, but they show a strict adherence to rules. So there has to be a rule for why you do or do not do something. Post-conventional, This is where they accept the possibility that there's conflicting values, and they try to make a rational decision between the two. This is when an individual has developed your own principles, and you're able to see that other people may believe and behave and act differently than you, and that's okay, and you figure out which is the best for you based on your own principles. Carol Gilligan did a study of this and said there was differences based on males and females, that she felt that they don't always make the same moral choices. For females, they tend to focus more on the gray area. Part of that ties back into how they're socialized. Females are seen as more caring and responsible. So they tie in personal relationships and loyalties, where males' perspectives tend to be more formal rule-based. They focus more on abstract principles to reach judgments about what's right and wrong. Last, let's look, I take that back, not last, let's look at Erikson's self and transition. First, we'll look at trust versus mistrust. In early childhood, if a parent leaves the room, a child may cry if they're not already asleep because they haven't developed that trust that they're going to come back. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. I oftentimes focus on potty training here. They're able to do certain things, but they still at times can't quite control being able to go to the bathroom, so they really want to slide, and then, but I need to go to the bathroom, but I really want to slide. But then if they have an accident and the kids make fun of them, they go into shame and doubt. Versus autonomy, I'm a big boy or girl, I can take care of myself. Initiative versus guilt. Realizing that you're capable of doing things, you're going to take initiative versus the guilt sometimes when you don't. Industry versus inferiority. Being able to accomplish tasks, move forward, or feeling like you can't accomplish certain things. And then identity versus role confusion. Especially during adolescence, they're trying to find their unique self. Who are they? But then at the same time, socially, we have confusing roles for them in that we say, no, you can't do this at this time because you're still a child. Yet we expect them, grow up, you need to act your age. So there's a lot of miscommunication socially, and they're still trying to find out who they are. Intimacy versus isolation, young adulthood, when they're starting to think about career choices, having a family, getting married, or are they going to stay single? Generativity versus stagnation, starting to get older, maybe midlife crisis, still being able to do things versus, no, I'm going to sit back and not do so much. Or integrity versus despair. Integrity, I may be old, but I've accomplished a lot in life. I still have a lot to live for versus despair of, oh, I've got one foot in the grave. You know, I'll probably die tomorrow. I can't get out. I might fall. And again, a lot of this goes through biological changes as well as sociological changes in a person's life. Next, we have Mead's social self or role taking. And this is focusing more on social behaviorism. Here, Mead says the self emerges from social experience, which is based on the exchange of symbols. To understand someone's intentions, you must imagine the situation from that person's point of view. So you're in the play stage. Social interactions, you start seeing yourself from others. And in many cases, like with kids, they take on the role of the others. In the play stage, they may imitate their mom and dad, put on their clothes, or carry their briefcase. In the game stage, they have focused on significant others, and they're able to generalize aspects to the rest of the interactions they may have. Now they understand the rules, the whole aspect that life's a stage. Cooley's looking glass self. Think of it as another person is your mirror. To begin with, they imagine what they look like. Then they get in front of the mirror. the other person, so they have the perceptions of others' views, and then they form their identity based off of how they've been viewed.